All right, so this topic is going to be over the large intestines, and let's just go into it. So the large intestines follow the small intestines in the path of food through the body, and in fact are going to be pretty much the last stop of food on its way out. The large intestines begin as the cecum, which, as we noted on the last time, is the little pouch that's below the ileocecal valve. So you have your small intestines sort of end. So this is going to be the end of the ileum. You have a valve here, and then you're going to have a little pouch that goes down, and then the large intestine is going to come up from there. You'll have this little dangly bit at the bottom of the pouch. This area here is the cecum and appendix. People used to think that the appendix didn't really have any function. We would rip them out, sort of like on a whim. We found out in recent years that the appendix actually does have a significant immune system function. The appendix is very populated with lymphocytes. It's thought that it's also full of bacteria, and it's thought that it might play one of two roles or possibly both roles, which is that, first off, food coming down, getting trapped into the cecum. Some of it will get in the appendix, where the immune system can sample any bacteria or any contaminating material in it. So it's like basically like a little scout as to what's getting into the large intestines, the colon. The other thought is that if something comes in and wipes out your intestinal flora, which isn't uncommon, like lots of intestinal parasites, cholera, many bacteria can just sort of take over your intestines. Let's say you survive that. Well, usually most of the bacteria that are in there have been like flushed out by that point. But the appendix, being this little pouchy bit behind, isn't really in the path of anything getting flushed out here, and so bacteria will emerge from the appendix and recolonize the intestine, because you want to have healthy, normal bacteria in your intestine. The intestine has several parts to it. So you have your cecum, which is that little pouch there. You then have your ascending colon, which goes up. You have your transverse colon, which goes across. You have your descending colon, which then goes down. And these two bends have names as well. This is the right colic flexure, and this is the left colic flexure. You then have the sigmoidal colon, which is at the end of the descending, where you take a little jiggy-jaggy bit. So that's the sigmoidal colon, and then you have the rectum and the anal canal. And that's basically the structure of the large intestine. And you can see all of those parts here, right? So here's where you have your chyme, your undigested chyme that's going to be on its way out soon. Coming in, here you have your cecum and appendix, the ascending colon, transverse colon, descending colon, sigmoidal, which means S-shaped colon right here. And then you have your rectum and anal canal ending in the anal sphincter. Your colon, its job is actually to compact and dehydrate food. No digestion happens in the colon, at least not by you. And the whole point of the colon is to suck back up as much water as possible from all of this food that has not been digested but has passed through. Now, when I said there's no digestion that takes place in the colon by you, the truth is that there's a lot of not you in that colon. There are about 800 species of bacteria that naturally lived in the large intestine, and they're going to be different in everyone. Well, everyone has their own unique set of gut flora, which we call the microbiome. And it varies depending upon what food you eat, what part of the world you live in, your genetics, and just random chance. These bacteria that naturally live in your gut actually do play a role in digestion, sort of. They can digest materials that you cannot. For instance, cellulose, pectin, and other complex carbohydrates that you can't really do anything with. And that's why they're there. They digest that stuff that you can't, and they use it for fuel, and they survive. Yay, good for them. Well, what do you get out of it? They actually synthesize some vitamins and other nutrients that you can't make on your own. So they help particularly in the synthesis of B and K vitamins. These bacteria do have some side effects. When they eat, they produce byproducts, just like you do. Their byproducts is primarily gas. An intestinal gas produced by bacteria is called flatus, hence flatulence. This is farts. Most of the gas is actually reabsorbed and doesn't come out. But a significant amount of it does come out. The gases that are produced include, well, it's actually mostly carbon dioxide, but it also includes hydrogen sulfide, indole, scatol, methane. Methane does not have an odor, but hydrogen sulfide, indole, and scatol all do have an odor associated with them. The methane and other hydrogen gases can actually burn. They are explosive. There's not usually a lot of oxygen in the guts, but if you have a tendency to swallow air, some of it will get down there. And it's actually possible for those gases to explode during electrocauterization if you're going in and, say, burning out a polyp. This is one reason why they have, well, there are lots of reasons why they have you come in fasting, but that is one of them. Food moving through the large intestines takes a long time. We talked about how it takes about 3 hours for food to move through the small intestines. Well, it takes about 36 to 48 hours for food to move through the large intestines. That, of course, assumes that it is being properly compacted. If you're producing excessive watery diarrhea, then food is moving way too fast through the colon. But if food is moving at its proper rate through the colon and is being properly compacted and properly dehydrated, which is what's mostly happening, that can take a day and a half to 2 days. Most of that time is spent in the transverse colon. This compaction process doesn't change the residue chemically, although some of the stuff done by bacteria can. For instance, the bilirubin in bile salts gets changed by bacteria in the gut, and this is what gives feces its stereotypical brown color. The whole point of this, or the main point of this, is to reabsorb water and electrolyte. Feces that exits you is about 75% water and about 25% solids. Of those solids, about 30% are bacteria. Bacteria die too, and they just go on out. About 30% undigested fiber. These are mostly cellulose and pectins that you can't digest. And about 10 to 20% fats. Remember that fats are not digestible unless they are solubilized. Bile salts do solubilize fats, but they're not perfect at it. Some of the fats are just going to stay conglomerated together, never get solubilized, and they're just going to flow all the way out. There's also a small amount of other stuff, mucus, proteins, electrolytes, some digestive secretions, and epithelial cells from the small and large intestine that have died and just fall off. The way that food moves through the colon is through something called haustral contractions. These happen about once every 30 minutes, and what happens is, like, you've all seen pictures of the large intestine, and you know that it's always depicted as having these, like, sort of ribbed sections. Well, each of those is a haustrum. And when one of these expands because food has been pushed into it, that is going to cause a reaction that causes it to contract. Not very quickly, but to contract, and that pushes the feces into the next haustrum. This, in addition to moving the feces along, also mixes it to promote water and salt reabsorption so that you're not just making a hard shell on the outside. While haustral contractions occur about every 30 minutes, there are larger contractions where you can actually feel the food moving down a bit. These stronger contractions occur usually 1 to 3 times a day, and they are triggered by basically the filling of the stomach. So you will often, like, eat and then feel a need to poop. And that is not because you are pooping out the food that you just ate. It is because the gastroiliac and duodenocolic reflexes, when the stomach is distended, when you fill your stomach, that causes your ileum, your colon, to undergo larger contractions. Same when the duodenum is expanded as your stomach releases food into the duodenum. The duodenum extends, it stretches, and that sends a signal to the colon, causing larger contractions there. And these larger contractions can move the residue several centimeters rather than just pushing it a little bit along. And as things move through the colon, they get to the point where you need to get rid of them. Now, this is why you often need to poop after eating. Once your food gets through the colon, into the sigmoidal colon. Past the sigmoidal colon, it is in the rectum. The rectum is very stretchy, and stretching of the rectum generates the feeling of, I gotta go. When the rectum fills up, it produces that urgent need to defecate. And of course, often this happens right after a meal because you've just moved the food along. There are actually two reflexes that are involved here. One is the intrinsic defecation reflex. This is actually not something that you are consciously aware of. It works entirely within the enteric nervous system, and basically expansion of the rectum, stretch signals there, travel to the muscularis, causing it to contract and causing the internal sphincter to relax. You've actually got two sphincters, two gates that block feces from getting outside. This first one just happens automatically. The rectum fills up, the first gate opens, food moves a little bit further on. Stretching of the rectum also sends signals to the spinal cord and up to your hypothalamus and thalamus, and this is perceived as the need to go. It moves up parasympathetic fibers. This need to go builds until you return, until you allow it to leave, basically. The way it builds is that you have like signals being relayed from your rectum up to your spinal cord on parasympathetic fibers. Those parasympathetic fibers send signals back, causing increased peristalsis, relaxing the internal anal sphincter more. And so more and more feces is going to build up at the gate. And this causes lots and lots of signal to get to the brain, saying, gotta go, gotta go, gotta go, gotta go, gotta go. Nonetheless, the external anal sphincter, what we think of as the anus, is a voluntary muscle. And it will only typically relax if your brain, your conscious brain, tells it to. That reflexive need to go can overpower your willpower in some circumstances, as many people are aware. If you have a particularly large, hard, and difficult to expel fecal load, you may have to squeeze your abdominal contents. Right, so this is going to involve taking a breath, bearing down with your chest, while at the same time contracting with your rectus abdominis and your stomach muscles to increase pressure in the abdomen. This is called the Valsalva maneuver, and that increases abdominal pressure and expels whatever happens to be in the abdomen out. So here we see just a simple diagram of the control of defecation. So as feces moves through the sigmoidal colon, the rectum fills. Here you can see the internal anal sphincter. And the filling of the rectum causes the internal anal sphincter automatically to open up. You have stretch receptors here in the rectum that send signals up sensory fibers to the spinal cord. There's an automatic parasympathetic reflex that goes back down and stimulates the internal anal sphincter again to relax. This sends more sensory signals up, and the sensory signals don't just trigger this reflex, they also go up to the brain, where your brain says, you better get to an appropriate place fast. And once you're there and your brain says, okay, let her rip, you have voluntary signals that come down the spinal cord, open up the external anal sphincter, allowing waste to be expelled. All right, and that's it for the path of food. At this point, we've gone from mouth to anus. The food has gone all the way through, been digested, and come out.